at the time that Life Skills Village started, there weren't really many programs that were taking a look at what it would take to rebuild or re-engineer or help people find themselves again and actually find comfort in themselves again. We don't do therapy for the sake of therapy. It has to have application for the patients in their life right away.
Welcome to Business Ninjas, brought to you by WriteForMe, where you'll hear from business leaders who are out there growing their business and slaying it every day. Learn from the masters. Let's get started.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Business Ninjas. I'm happy to be here today with Nate Gardin, founder and chief operating officer of Life Skills Village. How you doing today, Nate?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you, Andrew?
I'm good. Thanks for spending some time with Business Ninjas. Please go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and Life Skills Village.
So my name again, Nate Gardin, founder and CEO of Life Skills Village. Born and raised in the Metro Detroit area. Went to school at a small college called University of Michigan. Small
college. Was that 50,000 or something?
One or two people have heard of them. Sometimes they have something on TV people watch. Didn't do very well this past weekend, but people seem to be familiar with the school. So my background is really business entrepreneurship. It was a newer track in the 90s when I graduated, and really appealed to me. I think by my nature, I'm a people person, and sales, relationship, public relations, those have all really been areas where I find that I'm the most comfortable. I've always enjoyed it. And I think entrepreneurship offered me the best of both doing the things I like and having parents and grandparents saying, you should go into business. So that's how I ended up with that track. It really appealed to me, being able to take a look at all of the various different aspects and components of putting a business together and having some understanding and training in those areas. And there's just something that appeals to me about starting something from scratch. So that's my educational background. I grew up in a healthcare family. My dad was an executive at a large managed care provider, an insurance company here in Metro Detroit. He's also a psychologist. So I'm the son of a psychologist. I can account for a lot of things in my life.
We'll talk about your bar tab later. Yeah,
that's right. Exactly. So healthcare has been something I grew up with. I was familiar. My dad was very open at home and always spoke to us like adults. So I have a lot of familiarity with healthcare, which is why I knew I never wanted to go into it. And I ended up more on the entertainment side of the industry. I was involved in music and event production. I hung my own shingle up at one point and was doing more sales training. So I was working with newer businesses, and people may have the best ideas in the world, but if no one knows you're around or what you offer or how to buy it. So I ended up really doing a lot of sales training. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I did a lot of business plan development, worked a lot in the government with responding for requests for proposals and grant writing for federal government programs, state government programs, and avoided healthcare, generally speaking, until Life Skills Village.
And how did they talk you into getting into the healthcare space? What drew you in?
So I had some small clients I did some work with, more on the urgent care, emergent care side, and I am very much an old school understanding of economics. You make a product, you sell the product, you build a little margin in for yourself, you price it at a point that makes sense for you and makes sense for the customer, and move on. In healthcare, things work much, much differently. It's one of those areas where the largest payer, which is Medicare, dictates a set of pricing. I'm not quite sure how they come up with everything. They have a science for it and a rationale, but that doesn't always jive with what it actually costs to deliver the service. However, in healthcare, there's tens of thousands of codes. So large healthcare systems say, okay, we're making, here's where our level is here. We're making a profit, we're losing here, but we have to do this in order to get that. It seemed overly complex. Healthcare is when it comes to reimbursement and payment and revenue and even expenses, it's one of the more challenging fields. So I really did enjoy doing it. I particularly don't enjoy having to piece together loss codes of billing for certain diagnoses with those you make profit on, and then measuring that against the expenses and the cost of certain disciplines. But when I first started Life Skills Village, promises were made. We call that the big lie over here. Promises were made that we're going to be doing a comprehensive program, and it's a per diem rate. It was something I felt strongly about. There was certainly space in the marketplace for such a comprehensive program, and it had such a high value for the patients themselves, and also perceived in any normal business sense for even the payers, whether it was the individuals or insurance companies paying, that they were able to convince me that this is going to be really easy, and insurance companies are going to love this and patients are going to love this. So that's kind of how they got me into Life Skills Village and how I got started.
As somebody on the outside looking in, I've never understood how medical providers make a go of it when insurance companies take 120 days to pay 15% of the amount that is originally billed. I do not understand the cash flow in the medical industry. But past that, please tell us a little bit about what Life Skills Village does and what sort of services you provide for your patients.
So the initial concept behind Life Skills Village was recognizing that there are individuals out there that have suffered from a brain injury, whether that be a traumatic brain injury, the most obvious being a car or workplace injury, industrial injury, or acquired brain injury, so strokes, aneurysms, people that may have had cancer, brain cancer, and had parts of their brain removed, that type of injury to the brain. There wasn't really in the marketplace a comprehensive program that was dedicated to helping these people either refine themselves or re-engineer a lifestyle following these accidents and this huge change. Brain injury out of almost any type of ailment or diagnosis, brain injury is one of the most significant ones because it changes who you are. You can lose an arm and I'm still Nate without an arm. Or if I have a heart attack, I'm still Nate, but I had a heart attack. And cancer and many other diagnoses, they don't change who you are, but a brain injury, because of the complexities of the brain and how we spend a lifetime up until this moment, Andrew and Nate have been accumulating knowledge and data. They've been accumulating experiences, and that really frames who we are. When you have an injury that now affects your memory, it affects your processing, it affects your feelings, it's now changed. Andrew isn't Andrew anymore. Nate isn't Nate. And unfortunately, with head injury, unlike other injuries where maybe you get a severe burn, people can see the burn. They understand, oh, you're different now. You lost an arm, you have a burn. There's a physical effect. With head injuries, it's there in the head. So the world does not stop interacting with us any differently than it did prior to the injury. But we ourselves are vastly different. And at the time that Life Skills Village started, there weren't really many programs that were taking a look at what it would take to rebuild or re-engineer or help people find themselves again and actually find comfort in themselves again. So Life Skills Village was started, and it took a look at all of those disciplines of medicine. So we talk about psychology, both the evaluation side with clinical psychology and neuropsychology, taking a look at the psychiatry, because sometimes there are medications people need, their lives have changed, taking a look at physical medicine and rehabilitation. Those are the types of doctors that really quarterback anything having to do with the brain and rehabilitation. And then looking at those individual disciplines like occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech and language pathology, vocational and recreational rehabilitation. There was no comprehensive program that just was focused on those things needed to get better. It was really kind of scattered. You went here for OT, and then maybe things were bad and you were feeling bad, and then someone sent you to a psychologist. There wasn't really a comprehensive program that was invested in looking at all the disciplines, looking at all the areas where individuals struggling with this diagnosis need care, and actually providing those services. And so Life Skills Village was created bringing all those disciplines together. And then the other challenge being the environment. Most people, when they think of healthcare, they think they're going to go, they go, whether it's a big medical office or they're getting their care in a hospital. They're sitting in a waiting room, and then they're going into a room and they're talking to a therapist. And maybe if it's a psychologist, there's a couch if you're thinking old fashioned, or if it's a physical therapist, it's a gym type setting, or an OT or speech and language pathologist, you're sitting in an office. We really developed out the concept of patients needing to engage again with things in the real world. They have to be able to do functional things as opposed to just work on the practical side of rehabilitation. They have to be able to do what's called generalize. They have to be able to say, hey, I'm doing this. Now I understand how that affects the real life. So we created Life Skills Village, adding all the disciplines, and then really also as a community reintegration program. Our facility is very unlike any other facility. If you take a look at our website, we call it Life Skills Village because we were modeled. There was a little village, there were stores, and there was a movie theater, and there was a bank, and there were pet shops. We really wanted people to be able to generalize on the social side and the environment, not just working one-on-one in a closed door, but actually being able to work in an environment that more closely mirrored the real world, where you're in a store and you need to use skills that your therapist taught you. It's hard to really generalize what you were doing one-on-one sitting at a desk in an office versus now I need to go through a shopping list and my memory's not so good. So how do I create a shopping list? Or perhaps light bothers me now, or I don't like waiting in lines and my patience is gone, or I get agitated over smells, or certain patterns bother me now because of my head injury. It's hard in an office that's already a safe setting to be able to give people the skills needed to actually go back out and re-engage with their own communities. And so we started Life Skills Village, adding all those disciplines, being what we call true community reintegration. So really helping people get active again in their communities as opposed to just getting these therapies and not knowing how to apply them.
That's fabulous. Conceptually, now, is this inpatient or outpatient sort of treatment? Is this village a place where people come to avail themselves of your services, or are they actually living? Is this an inpatient type of situation?
So when we initially started, Life Skills Village on its own is all outpatient.
Okay.
We call ourselves the graduate program of rehabilitation, right? So you have your injury, you're in the hospital, and then most people are familiar with inpatient rehabilitation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's a hip or knee surgery or more serious injury, right? So you're in the hospital, they stabilize you, you've had your surgeries. Now they move you to an inpatient rehab where you're getting your 4 hours a day of your occupational therapy, your PT, your speech and language pathology. And then you step down from there, you go home, maybe you have help at home for a bit. We're what we call the graduate program. We always started out as the graduate program. We've certainly seen people straight out of the hospital, but usually we're seeing them, they kind of go through the process, they're feeling better. With head injury, very frequently it affects some physical components, and I think that's the most obvious to treat, and that's where there's a lot of the emphasis initially, getting people walking again, getting people talking again, getting people able to do their basic activities of daily living, like going to the bathroom and taking showers and shaving and grooming and taking medication. So those are the things that get the primary concentration right after the injury or the diagnosis. We've always been the graduate. So now that you're walking again and talking again, you're sitting at home, you're a different person. How do you engage with life again? How do you go back to work? How do you engage in recreation and leisure? How do you establish relationships again with friends and family members? How do you think again when you have deficits? If you're having a hard time with memory, what are things you can do now? So we've always been really that graduate program to help people reach a very functional and as high a level of independence as possible following these injuries or these illnesses.
No, I mean, it sounds like an immersive reintegration process, and it sounds incredibly important. How many people are you treating at a given moment?
In all of our outpatient services today, I'd have to say we probably have 500 to 600 active patients at any given time.
Wow.
are active in one or many of our programs. And it starts out, so, I mean, I'm telling you how we started. We've kind of evolved a little and shifted. We started out really just focused on brain injury, but now we have a large pediatric program for kids who have developmental delays, especially following COVID and the isolation. There are a lot of kids really having a hard time re-engaging. So we have a big pediatric program. We're working also a lot with older adults. We have a number of therapists in occupational therapy and PT and speech and language pathology that are trained in illness that affects older adults like Parkinson's. We were initially hesitant when we started to work with degenerative cognitive disorders like dementia. I mean, I think the common term people use is Alzheimer's, right? Because there's really no rehabbing that, but as the industry and as science and healthcare has learned, there's really a lot you can do to promote awareness. People that are diagnosed with dementia. So I'm going to use the term Alzheimer's. It's not necessarily the correct term because it's hard to diagnose Alzheimer's, but people diagnosed with dementia that's progressive and degenerative and non-reversible. There are things that can be done if you catch it early and on or towards the beginning that prolong independence. And they have a huge impact on the lives of the families of these individuals. I think the old school is someone gets an Alzheimer diagnosis and you go home and you mourn the loss and how do you take care of this person and woe is me. Today, especially with the cost of healthcare and long-term care and families where you may have people working and running lives, everyone has to work and do things, and now you may have a parent or a sibling that comes down with this disorder. There's a recognition that early interventions, early therapies can prolong independence.
Absolutely.
So just using an aged example, like dad now has dementia. He was living alone. Mom's not around. He's on his own. In the past, you're thinking like, when do I put him into a facility? You're really trying to extend people's stays at home and independence. And there are therapies, especially with occupational therapy and physical therapy and speech and language pathology that can be done to increase the amount of time they can stay independent. And that's working on building out memory cues and memory strategies and building out devices, especially in 2023 that we're in now with technology, doing things that can really give people that independence. They can prompt them. There are devices you can wear that will proximity devices that will turn on and off your ovens, right? So now if someone forgets that they were cooking something and in the past, oh, well, we got to send them to a nursing home. Today, there are proximity devices that will extend that. And that adds a lot of value to the individual themselves. And it's huge for the ecosystem that's their family of not needing that high level of care and someone always around. And then obviously there's also the mental health side. So I've been talking a lot about rehab, but mental health is a huge component. And there's just the adjustment, not even as much for the individuals diagnosed, the older adults diagnosed with these degenerative disorders, but also how does the family deal with it? How do you approach this? There's a profound loss. Here's someone living, but they're leaving us. So depending on how far the progression goes, they've lost us. This person that I married and I loved my whole life is now doesn't know who I am. And so there's a lot of recognition there, and we do an ever-growing amount in that arena with older adults. So our programming, we started as a brain injury, but really understanding the rehabilitation and the mental health side of it, and then just the demand for functional therapies that give people a chance out there. And so I think that's where we become known as a provider offering. And so we ended up branching from just brain injury into a fairly large pediatric division. It's super exciting. We really have a one-of-a-kind facility for pediatrics. The kids are hesitant to come in. They cry when they leave because they don't want to leave here. Well, our therapists are amazing. The facility is amazing. The therapies that we're offering are amazing. Following COVID, there's just this huge blast of kids that, are they behind? Are they not behind? Is it because of COVID? So there's a lot of evaluation there. And then also with the older adults and better understandings there. So I'd have to say, brain injury now is probably only about 20 to 25% of what we do. And the rest of what we do is traditional mental health. You're just traditional. And obviously we've seen an increase because of COVID and the effects there, and then the pediatric and the older adults. So really, the bookends are probably pediatrics, probably 25% of what we do, older adults probably 25% of what we do, and everything else that's maybe more traditional for mental health and rehabilitation sits in the middle. So
leads into one of the questions I was going to ask you. You know, COVID provided unbelievable challenges, but also opportunities for everyone. I've always imagined in a memory unit, how on earth do you explain to people that there's something going on that's making everyone sick and we need to be careful, and all of a sudden everything changes? But these are people who from moment to moment won't necessarily remember that conversation. So the challenges had to be paramount. Tell me about the last couple of years for Life Skills Village.
So COVID was, I can't personalize it and make it just my own. The entire planet experienced it. It was really a once in a lifetime type, God willing, once in a lifetime event. And for healthcare in particular, it was a huge challenge because you couldn't just go home and not get your healthcare. It's detrimental to health. People going and having a surgery needed for hip replacement, if they're not getting their physical therapy, they're really not getting the value from that treatment. And the same when you're working with a population that has mental health issues, they didn't get any better being locked up at home.
No.
So it was a fairly significant challenge at the beginning in assuring that our patients that require services are getting their healthcare services, especially with all the fare out there. We were very fortunate that being in mental health, and Dr. Brian Weinstein, who's a psychiatrist who initially came up with the idea, psychiatry, even prior to COVID, was probably one of the practices of medicine that most naturally lent itself to telehealth. You know, the old joke is if your psychiatrist is touching you, you probably should be talking to an attorney, right? Because out of all the disciplines of medicine,
I'm so sorry.
That's
Hilarious.
That was our joke around here as far as the natural fit. If your physician doesn't touch you, then I won't go to a physician that doesn't want to see me in person, even for my primary care visits, because it's my physical well-being. But psychiatry is there in the head. Your psychiatrist never's tapping your knee and doesn't have to look down your throat or your eye. So it was really a natural fit. And we were very fortunate that even prior to, there was an increase in the amount of telehealth. We had the platform set up even before COVID hit. We at least had the technology here because we were trying out telehealth for psychiatry. Unfortunately, the need for mental health is up here. The amount of mental health practitioners is down here. In the rural areas, we had a facility out in Flint. It's almost impossible to find a psychiatrist and get into a psychiatrist. So we were already working with telehealth already to try and be able to offer services in those areas that just don't have the services. Mm-hmm. So that kind of made the technology easy. We had the awareness. So we were very fortunate there to have already been set up that way. But it was a huge challenge. So you were talking about dementia patients or patients with dementia. I apologize. They're patients and people first, and they have dementia second. So patients with dementia, we heard a lot of horror stories. We just didn't see those patients. I think COVID was an absolute nightmare for, we know people, we have referral sources, we work closely with people in those fields. That population was decimated. When you take away the personal interaction on people, even on memory units in nursing homes, I mean, I have a very close friend, she's a social worker, she's in a home that does memory. People were not dying of COVID, they were dying because there was no interaction. You couldn't do those interactions. We have a sister program called Life Skills Residential. It's a transitional residential program for individuals with catastrophic brain injury. So I'm familiar because I work there every day. It was a very challenging task, especially dealing with highly compromised individuals and understanding the world's changed, and you have to stay at home. And particularly difficult for us because unlike some other programs and some other philosophies out there, our whole concept is giving independence and re-engaging with the world. And not wrapping you in a bubble because you were hurt and we want you to be safe forever. But hey, let's take risks. Let's go out there again. Let's build lives. And our patients, especially on our inpatient units, really struggled with all the, one moment we're pushing people out in the community and we're saying, don't isolate at home and you shouldn't be watching TV, and we're doing outings and we're really engaged in community, re-engaged in the community. And the next moment we're like, you can't leave your unit, you have to wear a mask, you can't talk to people. The communal meals disappeared, hanging with other people, we had to discourage that. And being very blunt and straightforward today in 2023, knowing so much more, I'd say after 2 or 3 weeks of it, after a lot of very intensive conversations with healthcare professionals, emergency medicine, infectious disease, and then working on rehab and psychology, we isolated our people. We got through, at the time, what was it, 14 days or 21 days? We got through this quarantine period. We were isolating our people, but we were creating an environment for them at least to engage with each other. And I know it's probably blasphemy in some circles to say this, but even at the time with these patients not understanding the mask use, even at that time saying it's a closed environment. Let's take the mask off. Let's re-engage again, at least with each other. When new people enter the environment, going through all the protocols, especially the first few months where everyone was scared, but you really had to weigh the harm you were doing with someone against the potential risks at the time with what we knew about COVID. And in the first few months after we saw, the numbers were increasing, but it seemed the morbidity, mortality was decreasing. We really opened up a little more, obviously within our own environment, to allow people to still engage. But it was a huge challenge. I mean, and I'm not saying this to be funny, but just the reality is we have patients that are very significantly impaired. And when you have a very severe brain injury and you've lost, depending on where it is and how it affects the mind, you've lost who you are today and you're regressing back, you could become very childlike. We have patients who walk out and because they may be on smoking restrictions based on their family, they pick up cigarette butts and smoke cigarette butts on the ground. I mean, this is something that happens with injury patients and mental health patients. And obviously in the time of COVID, that became a huge challenge. And these are the types of patients we were dealing with. So we had to be very creative in providing outlets, and it really did change the model. And then we do a lot of crisis intervention here as well. There was staff here every day. As I say, when you're doing crisis intervention and you have someone that may have suicidal ideation, and you have someone proverbially standing on the edge, and they don't know if they want to continue any longer and they need an intervention, and handing them a tablet when they're standing on the edge and saying like, well, just hit those buttons. That just wasn't an approach. So we really had a first responder approach on mental health with those crisis patients. And we had our doctors here and our clinical team. I mean, I know there was fear. I was scared every day myself, and I was trying to be the one to facilitate things as much as possible to reduce the risk for staff. But our team was there every day, and we had to deliver services in person. And even at the beginning, because people in crisis aren't thinking rationally, and you have to talk them off the ledge, and you're not doing it in a tablet. Sometimes you just have to be there. So we never fully closed because we were offering essential mental health services here. And we also very quickly, using everything, tried to get back in line to get people out of their homes. We have patients that we were maybe seeing therapists once a month because they were moved along, and depression sunk back in, and the isolation things, especially with the head injury, the patients worked so hard to rebuild disappeared in a second. And so we were back to in-person about 2.5 months, probably by May or June. We were already doing very limited, but back to in-person just to give people the engagement, get them out of the homes. I mean, that's hugely detrimental, especially to people struggling with injury or illness.
Hey, I try to look at some upside. I'm hopeful that you talk about a brain injury being something no one can see. Mental health problems are something no one sees from the outside. I don't think there's a human being on this planet that didn't experience some level of depression or anxiety in the first 6 months of COVID, right? So I'm hopeful that
Speaking for myself, I certainly did.
Of course, no, I mean, I'm hopeful that the the systemic level of empathy and awareness and concern for others. And hopefully that translates to funding for projects like yours. I'm hopeful that the average person now goes, wow, I never understood what some people go through. And I've had a little taste of it and it's not so pleasant. So I'm hoping that, you got to look at an upside, maybe that people make a tiny change towards the empath mode when they interact with people they don't know. Because again, people are swans. You don't know what's going on below the water until you peel that onion and somebody starts
Right.
crying and you know what's really happening. So
Well, to walk a moment in their shoes, right? I mean, there are people that are pervasively lonely. You see them out on the streets. You're in California, and I know you see in the national news, it's a big problem in Northern California with homelessness, which is a mental health and substance use issue. They may be out there in crowds, but those people are incredibly lonely, a lot of them. They're just looking for engagement, and a real engagement, and a dignity and a respect given to them as a human being. And like you, I would hope that if there's any benefit from COVID, it's that the entire world walking in those shoes, and at moments feeling very lonely and isolated. I hope that gets built on, and that has long-term positive effects.
We can only hope. Unfortunately, humans tend to have short memories, but I hope that that's the case. Tell me a little bit about a Mind Health Group and the fact that Life Skills Village is it a partnership? It is a division? How does that work?
So just to give you a little of the business back end. So Life Skills Village is owned fully by a psychiatric practice called Summit Psychiatric Services. It's Dr. Weinstein's idea. He put it under Summit for insurance and stark compliance issues, right? He had patients he wanted to send to the program. So because of referral in healthcare, it gets very complex on referring patients. There's something called stark. It has to do with making sure that business doesn't get in the way of ethics when it comes to healthcare. Mm-hmm. But it can also be very limiting, even for people doing things completely right, with the best intent for the patient. So Life Skills Village was the rehab component, the rehabilitation and mental health component under the psychiatric care. So there's Life Skills Village, there's Summit Psychiatric Services, and then there's also a pharmacy under Summit Psychiatric Services specializing in pharmaceuticals specific to mental health issues. What we notice is these entities, even though all related, they're offering complementary services, but we weren't getting a lot of overlap in our Venn diagrams, right? We had the circle for Life Skills, and then there was the circle for Summit, and then there was the circle for Peak. But all of the individuals in all of our circles were getting all the other services, right? So Peak Pharmacy, they were filling scripts for mental health for other psychiatrists and other mental health providers outside of the circle that Summit didn't know about, and Life Skills didn't know about, and Life Skills were treating patients from other psychiatrists, and they're going to other pharmacies, and the same with psychiatry. They're treating patients and they're getting treatment all over town. So obviously, not from both a healthcare standpoint and a patient standpoint, as far as continuity of care, and then obviously from a business standpoint, we recognize we should probably be doing something together and letting at least patients. This is a sister of companies. We're all very confident that what we're offering, we have a high level of expectation. We believe in ourselves. We believe that we're offering the best product in healthcare to patients. So why wouldn't us as Life Skills Village in the rehab, if someone's seeing a psychiatrist or looking for one, not naturally say Summit, and the same with Peak Pharmacy. And so we said, hey, we really need to do a rebranding here and a restructuring of the business to have more seamless flows for the patients, to offer patients that didn't realize they can get services elsewhere. There's so many times patients go on and their doctor says you need a psychiatrist, and they get a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist may write a script and say you need counseling, but it kind of falls off, right? It's not in the norm path. So now they're seeing their doctors, but the psychologist they're not seeing. So as far as for patient continuity of care and better care for patients. And so we realized that almost everything that we do here is in the head. We came up with Mind Health Group, and that really just became the overlapping companies. So Life Skills Village is a division of Mind Health Group. Summit Psychiatric is a division of Mind Health Group. Peak is a division of Mind Health Group. So it's just from a business and a marketing perspective, and from our patient perspective and the experience that they have once they're here in our environment, it's Mind Health Group. It's where you go when you're not feeling yourself. That's what we specialize in, whether that's from an injury, an illness, developmental delay. It's when you're not feeling yourself, we have all the services, and we really have all of the services. When it comes to our offerings outside of a hospital system that offers a little of everything, we're one of the very few comprehensive entities out there in healthcare that if it's brain related, if it's going to affect how your brain works, how you feel, how you present yourself to the world, we offer everything. So, and that's all we offer. We're not getting distracted with our bariatric surgery division and our orthopedic and our ER. We're just on the brain and how you relate and engage with the world. That's how we developed our Mind Health Group. So our patients love it. We get a great feedback on it, and it makes a more seamless experience for our patients as well, in making sure they actually get the services that they need.
I was unaware that anybody had your comprehensive approach to brain injury like that, and I really appreciate what you do, and I think a lot of more people need to know that this is possible. That sort of reintegration approach, that instead of isolating you but trying to get you back into being as much of yourself as possible and having as much of an independent life as possible, is important.
Or a new self. Sometimes people don't get back to themselves. It's about re-engineering and recreating something for themselves that gives them comfort and gives quality of life and peace in life.
Yeah, and especially in the context of mental health, the possibility of change is a huge concept to grasp. That there is any possibility of change. It's important. Tell me about the pediatric services that you've added. These are not children with traumatic brain injuries for the most part. This is more of a reintegrative and mental health care approach for the children.
Unfortunately, we still do see some catastrophic injury with kids in pediatric. Thank God it's not a vast part. It's really difficult to see. We started our pediatric division about a year before COVID hit. COVID kind of put it on pause. The kids were just at home, but we're really seeing now is a lot of just developmental, especially with the socialization. I have a son at home. In fact, he just turned 4 today. His experience the first few years of his life were vastly different than yours and I, Andrew.
Oh,
and you have a lot of parents. It's a norm, right? He's not unique in his experience. Every kid his age had that. And the system itself, I have the confidence will adjust for it. But there's certainly a lot of questions parents have today as to, the more you know, right? The internet and just knowledge and TV has exposed us all to things that our parents didn't know when we were growing up. So they couldn't ask these questions. Today, parents ask more questions, and parents want to know, is my child have a development delay? Is there something wrong? You see the awareness in the autism area, right? Mm-hmm. You see a lot of effects of the digital media in itself and the screen time the kids get that mask and that start presenting as autism and other developmental. Parents have a lot of questions, and there's just a huge demand out there. And unfortunately, in the marketplace, there's a big gap in the amount of providers to provide the evaluation and treatment when necessary. And so we started our pediatric division as well, really bringing on, doing groups. We have a lot of groups for engagement, which is meant to kind of reassure parents. I think that we have something called Social Butterflies. It's a socialization group for kids 2 to 5 years old, right? It's a great environment here. It's run by our therapists to identify for parents, is this normal? Is this not normal? Is this something I should follow up on, or should I not follow up on? And there's a huge demand in that in the pediatric side. And then also just the treatment. In the past, you had schools offering a lot when it comes to OT and speech and language pathology, but the schools are more overwhelmed than ever. COVID really exacerbated or highlighted an issue that's been growing for a while. They can only provide such a limited amount of treatment because they may have a social worker and a speech therapists and occupational therapists in the school, but they have 1,000 kids on their docket that they have to do they're evaluating kids, they have to provide treatment, they're working on IEPs for kids with developmental delays. And so we really recognized a need there. We built out a model that we felt can identify what's normal and what can be expected versus something that needs follow-up, and then being able to offer those services. I think one of the most unique things, not just about our pediatric service, but about our entire model, is our approach in training our therapists. We're not a multidiscipline practice, right? Some people say, oh, you're a multidiscipline, right? You have speech and OT and psychology. We're what we call a transdisciplinary practice. Our OTs get trained in behavioral health and speech. Our behavioral health get trained in function. Most of the training that we do gets done in the group with all of the disciplines, and we work together. In fact, I know you can't see our facility here, but on the video just here in my office, but we have a bullpen. Our clinical team, all of the disciplines work together in an office, and it creates a transdisciplinary approach where in the old days, a doctor or a school may say someone needs OT because they're delayed, right? You have a kid that's delayed, but it may not be, it may not be something that's physical. It may even not be something where there's a delay mentally. Perhaps there's something else going on in life. The world's complex these days. You have families that what we consider a traditional family has evolved. Maybe there's friction in life going on, and this is a behavioral thing. All of the therapists here train together. So when you come here and your doctor writes a script for speech and language therapy, and this happens all the time, speech may come and do an evaluation with the patient and say, you know, based on what I'm seeing, this isn't a speech thing. This is a behavioral thing. Your child is not, I can meet and work with your child, but we're not addressing the underlying condition, which is the child has some depression, or the child feels afraid in the classroom, or there's something scaring them at home. And having a transdisciplinary team and just focusing on the brain really gives us a high capacity to recognize this across any of our disciplines and get people that same day into a different discipline. So having all these services, when our speech recognizes that they write a note and their treatment note to the doctor, they talk to the family and they say, Mom, I truly think that you probably should meet with a therapist, a child therapist that specializes. This isn't so much a brain function thing as it is a behavioral type thing, or some type of depression. We're going to go walk to reception. I'm going to write a note to your doctor already now, updating your doctor and recommending that he write a script or he make a recommendation for behavioral health. And right there, the speech and language therapist can download on a behavioral health therapist that they know and they work with every day. And that kid transitions. And then if at some point, maybe there still are some speech issues, they can get back to speech. When you're going to speech in one place, and you're going to behavioral health in another place, and you're getting your OT somewhere else, it makes that process much more difficult. And very frequently there are misses. People just work at speech and they don't get the results that they want. It's because they have the wrong modality of treatment, and it just extends the process till someone can get the help they need. That happens in big hospital systems, right? Speech is over here and OT is all the way over here. And maybe they're both talking to the doctors, but speech may be working. It may not get very quickly to a behavioral health or be a functional issue with OT. And I think that's what we offer here on our pediatric side, is having that comprehensive offering, just like we do with adults and brain injury, and being able to really get the kids on the right treatment plan and with the right treatment. And then of course, also having the philosophy here, which is just functional. We don't do therapy for the sake of therapy. It has to have application for the patients in their life right away. And with kids, that's the kids themselves have to be happier, and the family, the dynamics in the family have to be happier. And so I think that's really where we excel on our pediatric side.
That's a beautiful approach, really. You're saying a lot of things that I have felt about the way things are approached in part and parcel that just don't work and don't serve the patient. You know, we've had a diagnosis frenzy at the elementary school level for a long time, and it's happening at a low level, meaning a school psychologist writes a note and all of a sudden a pathway has begun that isn't approached the way that your organization approaches, and kids are not served. I've always thought, you know, we all live on a sine wave, right? For some people, the amplitude is more manageable than others, but
Sure.
when you meet a
Sure.
therapist, they're getting a 10-15 minute section of your sine wave. That is not the entirety of a
Right.
person. And it sounds like
Right.
your organization is really approaching the entirety of a person, and I appreciate that.
We're trying to, and I want to be careful also. We know a lot of great educators out there. I think the individuals in the schools, every individual I've met in any school system, even those failing, the people who work in them, they're passionate about what they do every day. They truly want change. It's the system itself that's failing. And a
Absolutely.
lot of that's funding. I mean, we spend a lot more on upper education, on full adults already than we do on raising people to get to that point. I mean, when you get to the academia system, the collegiate system here, I mean, there's so much funds that go into that, but these are already formed individuals. And I watch every day in our school districts where the kids developing to even get there, the resources aren't there. And so people try hard, but that's really where we tie in. You're getting services at school. And I know your speech therapist at school cares about the kids and they're trying their best, but they have this much space. And that's what I tell all parents. If you feel something's wrong, get it checked out. Even if it's just to have someone reassure you you're fine, you'll feel much better and the home life will be better. But if there is an issue, you can't rely on the school to do it all. I mean, I think maybe that's part of the problem. We're relying on schools too much to do everything. And that's not fair to the people in the schools, and it's not fair to your kids.
Not at all. And no, the formative years are incredibly important, and that's where the funding isn't going. I mean, I'm here in the west side of Los Angeles. Now, we have the second largest school district in the country, and I understand the challenges. You've got everything from East LA to Bel Air, and you got to try to level set. When my daughter was in elementary school and they had a nurse for 1 hour a day, 2 days a week or something, you know, the idea that there's no care in an emergency because they just don't think that funding's important enough. And certainly mental health care is further down the line than physical health care. So there's just no funding for it, which is terrible.
Yeah,
It's an important time and it's an important process.
absolutely.
I really appreciate what you do and how you're going about doing it. Obviously, you're taking care of a lot of people, and people need to know that that's what you're doing. Tell me something you'd like to be celebrating a year from now, personally, professionally.
Wow. Personally, I think you actually just hit on it. You just hit on it with LA. I think, especially recent, you know, we just saw, even those of us that don't follow football, there was this huge event that happened on a Monday night football game, and you have a player that was injured, and that promotes a lot of awareness. And thankfully that wasn't a head hit, and it was more of a cardiac event, and we get all of that. But things like that promote awareness. I think COVID really started the engine on mental health a little better, and you mentioned it, and understanding that perhaps as a society here in the US, particularly as a society here in America, I'd like to see a year from now that these little threads that have kind of come out, people are pulling on them. And you're starting to see it. The Biden administration certainly speaks to mental health quite a bit, and allocating funding and trying to make more funding available to more individuals for mental health. We're starting to see, you know, the whiplash from how, you know, the educational system and COVID. When you talk about my personal goals, I work and I advocate on it. Doing this podcast with you, and obviously you're passionate about it as well. Doing this podcast with you, what I'd like to see a year from now is that these little threads that have started, more funding from the government and more awareness that happens, they actually start translating into growth at that level. And we've seen some small threads where they've opened up ABA therapies for kids, which is behavioral therapy. And I know that's only really extreme cases, but we're starting to see it a bit. And if a year from now, if we're able to provide comfort and growth, and what I like to see are more patients and less visits. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Because the support systems are there. I think every clinician here would prefer to see even though it's a lot more work just to see a patient a couple of times than it is to see a patient once a week for a year. If we're seeing, instead of seeing the 500 or 600 active patients, if we have 2,000 active patients, but their treatment is the amount of treatment and the length of treatment has reduced, then that'll be a huge goal. I think that's a goal of everyone here. I mean, we advocate for it in recognizing, and we're talking about the pediatrics, but for older adults as well, right? It's just, I'd love to see the awareness in degenerative disorders and the awareness you see now with people that are coming down earlier and earlier with dementia and other diseases, and the awareness of saying, hey, the second you get that diagnosis, it's not time to go crawl into bed and basically stay there until you die and the whole family withers with it. But that recognition, there are things you can do. You can come in and you can get some treatment. You can get some treatment that helps teach you and provide you with adaptive tools to help you live independent, and that works with family members and really truly understanding, what does it mean when someone has dementia? What are things I need to start putting in place? There's a lot of education, right? Like even in my own personal life, having dealt with it, I have family members with the disorder, and people just such frustration, like, does she recognize me? There's so much that gets built into that because the education awareness isn't there. So if as a society and obviously funding starts, at the government and in a lot of ways, because it's Medicare and Medicaid, if we can pull at those threads and we can start seeing more patients initially and getting them on the right track, and we're seeing an increase in support services out there that they're able to now take over and give that increased independence. I mean, that's our goal. I mean, I'd like to see 4 times as many patients, but like to see them for a quarter as long. I don't know if that makes sense.
That completely makes sense. And I once again, I truly appreciate that a person with your heart and mind is in the position you're in, because it's important that that energy flows from the top of a system like you're running, and that people are getting treated the way you're treating them. I truly appreciate that. Dementia and Alzheimer's has touched my family in a couple directions too, with very different results, and early diagnosis and supplements and oxygen and OT and the right sort of care really changed everything. So I truly appreciate what you're doing, and more people need to know about it.
My message for everyone listening to the podcast, and my message in general, is no one needs to be ashamed to ask for help. We ask for help in every area of life these days, but somehow we're wired not to ask for help when it comes to how we're feeling and who we are. And whether that be a mental health issue, whether that be a developmental delay with kids, whether that be a dementia or older adult issue on the tail end, to ask for help and to go someplace. I'd love you to come here, but to go someplace and get help and get pointed in a direction and find out what you can do, because it will bring a lot of peace. It's a weight off your shoulders when you share it with someone else. And when you share with someone, you can start that whole process. So, I mean, that's my big ask for everyone. Just go ask for help, find out where to go to a professional that knows and can tell you what to expect, and could set you in the right direction for services and the things that you need. And it's a whole world. It's this huge burden that gets taken off you as understanding happens, and you can be working towards doing something, whether you can stop the progression of something or not, but at least you're now involved in doing something, and you're living life again. You're engaged, you're functioning, you're being independent.
That's an important one. I appreciate it. Please tell everyone Life Skills Village's URL and what social media channels they can find you through as well.
All right. So we're at www.lifeskillsvillage.com. We can also find us at mindhealthgroup.com if that is a little easier to remember, or even easier to remember is our slogan, OK starts today, right? Because once you start getting help, OK starts today. We can start feeling good about ourselves. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Instagram. Our marketing team does a great job digitally, and you can find us on Google, just searching for us. And so there are many different channels. I think we're active on Twitter. We're active on LinkedIn. If you need help, you can call. You go to our website, www.lifeskillsvillage.com. It's open 24/7. you can send a message. We're happy to, if we can't provide the service or you have a question, we have a lot of resources here, and we love getting people in the right places.
Nate Gardin of Life Skills Village, it's been wonderful spending some time with you today. I truly appreciate who you are and what you do, and I hope this helps get the message to more people who need your services.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I've enjoyed myself today, and it's been a pleasure.